Welcome everyone to this session on Abacus and Analects, crafting a grand design for corporate purpose in the Reiwa era. I'm Tamsin. As mentioned, I'm a partner at Brunswick Group, the global communications advisory firm. Previously a journalist at The Economist for a couple of decades, including here in Tokyo as bureau chief. So this panel, it's a corporate purpose. I think it's highly relevant for Japanese business right now. If you go to kind of any good bookshop, you would go into the business section and it's just absolutely stacked with tomes on corporate purpose, sustainable development goals, and so on. And it's also obviously a key part of the government's new capitalism focus. This panel is going to look at really how Japanese firms are adopting corporate purpose. Sort of the spurs to that, and most importantly, are they getting it right, and are they getting all the opportunities from corporate purpose that are there, and how could it go wrong in future? And we've already introduced our fantastic panelists. I think that they all have a very kind of hands-on, practical experience with companies, which is excellent because corporate purpose is sometimes a subject that can get a little theoretical and vague. So George, obviously a highly experienced board director at several companies. Akiko advises on strategy, so the sort of the hard end of or it's certainly not the purposey end of things. Mitsuru has founded a company, Euglena, which is really has purpose at the very, very heart of it in terms of the actual articles of association. And Nicholas Benners from the Board Director Training Institute, a long-standing expert on corporate governance. So just a note on running order also, we really want to have some questions in the final kind of 20 minutes or so. So as we discuss the topic, please do make notes on what you'd like to ask, and then we'll have a good session at the end on that. So with that, I'll get on with the panel, get on with the discussion. And my first question, I think, is to set the scene a little bit and just explore the notion that essentially, corporate Japan has had purpose, under a different guise. You might call it stakeholderism, but in place for a long time. And George, I'd love if you could give us a sense of the sort of the post-war sense of purpose, which was so strong, and set the scene for us a little bit.
Well, thanks, Tamsin, and it's very good to be here today. I think the first interesting point to mention about purpose in Japan is that there is no Japanese word for purpose when used in the context of corporate purpose. They say, or we say, purpose. And it's the same for governance and many other issues relating to the purpose of the company and how it's governed, for whom it's governed. And this, I think, is a sort of clue as to the lack of thought that has been given, systematic thought that's been given to the purpose of the company in Japan. And having worked for most of my life in a foreign firm, and then having for the last 3 years, this is a long time ago, moved from this foreign firm into a Japanese firm that the foreign firm acquired, UBS having acquired a subsidiary of Long-Term Credit Bank. I thought, having lived in Japan for many years and speaking the language reasonably okay, I thought I understood Japanese companies, but when I moved to this subsidiary of a Japanese company, it was extraordinary how little I found I understood the motivations of Japanese employees. Japanese organizations, Japanese companies are historically very much like communities. Communities exist in the same way that clubs do, for the purpose of its employees, for the perpetuation of the club. In the context of Japanese communities, corporate communities, they consist mainly of men, Japanese men who entered the company straight from university. So this is the purpose of the historic purpose of the Japanese company in my view, and certainly in having worked with many Japanese companies, this is something I feel that strongly still exists.
But was there not something a little bit more, a little nobler in kind of just rebuilding the economy?
Yes, certainly.
Start with.
Yeah, and then in the immediate post-war period, I think that sense of mission of rebuilding the company, rebuilding the Japanese economy was a very strong sense of purpose that was imbued to all Japanese companies. Yeah. But obviously, in the next ensuing 50, 60 years, that sense of mission has slightly disappeared. So it was in the historical context, yes, a very key thing.
Akiko, can yes, please chip in there. I mean, do you have a sense that there are often kind of the founders' values and a kind of a sense of community stretching back a long way? And does it feel relevant, those kind of, whatever it is, a plaque on the wall with sayings from, many decades ago?
Thank you, Tamsin. I'm Akiko Karaki. For those I have not met, nice to meet you here. And it's a great pleasure to be with my fellow panelists in Tamsin and you guys. As for the point that George raised, I agree with most of the parts. When I help clients, though, I do feel that the foundational purpose, if we may, it's still somewhat considered to be very a foundational thing. But it was something, as George pointed out, something that we built right after the war. So it is mostly around, we have to rebuild this country. We have to just make sure that we use our technology, our people to just be back on track. That was sort of our purpose. And then after a while, we re-emerged. The purpose is less relevant, but somehow we still really very much honor the original purpose. So in a way, just to give a bit of a flavor to what George has commented, I do think many companies think that we have a purpose, but now let's stop and think about it. Is our purpose really relevant to us or our future? People are starting to think about it. And that's why we see lots of books around purpose and lots of discussions about purpose. Being a strategist, I have never had a project on let's build a purpose or let's revisit our organization or the organization setups in Japan. It's not a favorite topic in the past, but nowadays it is becoming more and more of an interest. I think the reason is because of that people just realize that the purpose that we think we had is no longer relevant.
Thank you so much. Mitsuru, your company has got sustainable development goals kind of actually in its articles of association, which is remarkable. Do you, when you yourself think about the post-war period and the kind of sense of mission, as it was probably called then, rather than purpose, do you feel that is out of date? Do you feel that was a strong impetus in the past, and is it still relevant?
Yeah, thank you, Beth-san. I'm Mitsuru. I'm running a bio startup company called irregular as a founder and as a president as well. And yeah, it's very difficult to define what purpose is. But for me, it's very simple. My personal purpose is to solve the malnutrition problem in developing countries. When I was a student in the first grade in the University of Tokyo, I visited Bangladesh and I saw the real issue in there. And I was determined to solve the malnutrition issue in Bangladesh in 1998. And I came back to Japan and I invented the new technology to produce a wide range of nutrients for solving this issue. And finally, I founded the company, Irregular Corporation, 2005. So I think since 2000, many startup companies are originated from the university, colleges, and national research institute. The number of startup company from the universities is reached over 3,000. Yeah, collectively 3,306 venture companies originated from the universities. And all these startup, the purpose drives us. The purpose is the their motivation for solving the social issues and achieving the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, 17 goals, is the purpose. Why do I set up? Why do we found the startup by using the advanced technology from the university? Very simple. So I'd like to answer the question: what purpose is that? The purpose drives us, and the real motivation, passion, is coming from the purpose, personal purpose.
That's really fascinating. It's incredibly striking that you say that really, I mean, all or the vast majority of recently formed startups are kind of built around purpose. I think that's really remarkable. I mean, how do you look back on sort of phrases like Sampo Yoshi, this sort of familiar phrase about sort of three-way good, good for the buyer, good for the seller, good for society? Do you, I mean, from your point of view, sort of being very familiar with the kind of purpose statements of young firms, do you consider the former kind of statements very old-fashioned and out of date, or are you glad, Mitsuru, that there is a sort of foundation of stakeholderism here?
Yeah, in nature, the younger generation, I mean the millennials and Generation Z, are really on the same track of the Sampo Yoshi. So we have to promote our purpose to the multi stakeholders, including the institutional global investors and the Japanese individual investors. I mean, in Japan, the listed company from the university is 67, and they think that Japanese people are really familiar with the idea of Sampo Yoshi. So we don't promote our special ideas or expertise related to the Sampo Yoshi or for solving the achieving the SDGs. So we need to more actions promoting the companies' activities themselves for the institutional investors and the other multi-stakeholders.
You mean both startups and large companies need to talk more about?
Yeah, exactly.
Sort of what they do for society. Sure. I see. Okay. Nicholas, I'm very interested to know what you think also from this historical perspective. I mean, if you think about, stakeholderism, there are, of course, lots of different stakeholders. It might be somewhat unfamiliar, but you could actually call shareholders a stakeholder as well as employees or suppliers and so on. How would you? What do you think who do you think the stakeholders have been, and do you think other stakeholders have been left out in the sort of community based approach up to kind of 10 years ago, say?
So as I was thinking, as I was hearing the other speakers make their excellent comments, I was delighted to be here. But I was thinking to myself that as the person who has advocated for corporate governance improvement here for more than 20 years and proposed the concept of a corporate governance code to the Japanese government and has taught now more than 2,500 directors or pre-directors at PDTI, it's interesting to consider that this is the very first time in any public forum, whatever, I've been asked or I have discussed the topic of purpose. or even lean in, or anything else you might call like that. And I was also thinking that after 14 years on Japanese boards, I agree quite much with comments made earlier by George and others to the fact that even now, but most of all historically, since shall we say post-war period in particular, not pre-war. Pre-war was quite different. The fundamental purpose of most Japanese companies has been their continued existence as a community of shared interests of people.
Meaning the most important stakeholders have been management and kind of permanent employees.
Us, yes, our group.
And who's been left out?
And even when you say Sampoyoshi, you don't see shareholders there, do you? Now, that, of course, was in that day when he was talking about it, there were not a very large, diverse group of fragmented shareholders, so it kind of made sense to leave it out. But shareholders obviously are a very important stakeholder. And the thing that I'm a little bit afraid of right now is everyone jumps onto the bandwagon of we need a purpose. This is, on one hand, a good phenomenon. It arises from the fact that young people and many people alike in Japanese society and around the world are now starting to think that, is it enough for a company's main only purpose to be making money? Is that enough? Because that's driving us into climate change and all sorts of other problems and externalized risk and that sort of thing. Is it enough? On the other hand, in the context of Japan, when you consider our shared community as being the stress, the focal point of our purpose so far, we suffer the risk that we take shareholders and kick that can down the street, and we don't realize that purpose of a company has to involve it's something you have that motivates. As was said earlier, it is something that motivates and captivates employees, management, shareholders, customers in particular, and is socially acceptable. And if you don't have those things and you can't captivate also shareholders as well, you will not be sustainable because you won't be profitable. You don't hold those people as being important as well. And if you're not profitable, you won't be able, as not being sustainable, you won't be able to achieve your stated purpose. And the last thing I would say just very briefly is there's your stated purpose and there's your real purposes. And that's what Japanese companies and companies around the world as well, but particularly Japanese companies have to think a lot more about. It's easy to put up on paper, as they do with VNN and that sort of thing, a very pretty mission statement or statement of purpose. It's a lot harder as managers to drive it down through strategy into the ranks and have the tone at the top go down and be reflected in the actions of managers and their subordinates and employees.
Thank you so much. So I'd like to move on to just to talk a little bit more about what purpose should be in the context of Japan. And I think, I've had a lot of discussions, including with Ken Shibusawa, who's a Brunswick advisor, and obviously great grandson of Eiichi Shibusawa. I mean, his view, we'll be hearing from him later in the day as well. I mean, he just says, Japanese companies have lost their sense of purpose. And, one data point would be that, the vast sort of cash hoard that's being sat on, I think it's about 60% of GDP now. So Akiko, I'd like to come back to you and ask you from a strategy point of view, what's a good corporate purpose for Japanese firms? Is it about risk-taking? Is it about change? Is it about global competitiveness? What should be the corporate purpose that gets adopted and acted upon?
Thank you, Tamsin. That's a very challenging question. So when I advise clients, I rarely get the question, what should be our purpose? And when they start asking the question, they come to us saying, well, we actually need a purpose. Can you build a purpose for us? I would imagine myself saying, perhaps we should wait a little while. Because I do think a purpose is something that should be built on your strategy. What is it that you want to do? And then represents your real feeling. when you start writing a nice letter on the board, like this should be our purpose, like let's be nice to the community, etc., that will be something that does not resonate yourself. So what I typically advise is let's understand what is it that you want to do. Do you want to be a global #1 in this field? Or do you want to be whatever? I want to conquer the digital world or something like that. And then that should show what you are very excited about, what you're passionate about, and how you would like to give back to the society and how you're going to get the benefit from that, be paid from the society in a way, so that that makes your business sustainable. And that should be your purpose. So in a way, I know it sounds a bit counterintuitive, but I would advise my clients to think, what is it that you want to do before you really think about your purpose only, because that's going to make you left in a maze in a way, because you have your business and you have your long history. You're going to start just word smashing and all the way through. So coming back to Tamsin's question, what is a good purpose? I would say that it's something that is deeply connected to your business and your growth direction, and also your emotion, how you are motivated, how you're passionate about running your business. Unless those conditions are met, the purpose will not be your purpose, and it will not be different from your competitor peer business's purpose, and it will just be a word that is on the wall.
Thank you so much. Nicholas, can I ask you to come in and, what should purpose be from your point of view? Is it clearly shareholders have to be in there?
Yes, obviously. This is a company, they own us. And they expect your purpose and your strategy to be such that maximizes the resources you have in a direction that obviously is socially acceptable, but captivates and resonates, galvanizes people internally and externally. You need a lot of external people to support you as well, and that you feel from your heart. So I don't think purpose could ever really work very well if you sit down and say, well, what should our purpose be? That shows you're a dying company already in a way. Everything we just talked about, what purpose is simply what good management is. Good management is seeking to find a sustainable way to grow and profit that benefits at the same time in a fair way all the people that are necessary for that process. And those stakeholders may change over time. One of the things that's very commonly said in Japan is, we work for all stakeholders, which turns into a great way of sort of saying, well, no, I have to maximize the needs of that stakeholder, so I'm not going to satisfy you. And you play off the stakeholders against each other. Well, no, that's not how things work. There is an optimal prioritization of stakeholders that will enable you to make this sustainable growth and profitable.
And what is that? What is that?
Well, that's what you're going to have to define as a manager. That's the job of a manager. And if you as a manager don't have a good idea of what that purpose is, then you should be replaced.
But we know what the categories are, don't we? We know it's suppliers, it's employees, it's management, it's broader society.
But the point is that they're not all equally, all of them, say, they just look at supplier or look at employees. They're not all equally important. The older or the younger staff who are not productive are not your highest priority stakeholders. The young people who have a lot of potential, who are underpaid and are studying hard to try and improve themselves, who may actually quit and go somewhere else later on, those are the people you want to quit. Those are your high priority stakeholders in the employee group, just to make an example.
I agree with that. I mean, I think you can't anymore focus on essentially your employees and your parts makers.
It's not that simple.
You've got to move on from that. Mitsuru, can I ask you, who are the important new stakeholders?
Yeah, that's point. Yeah, your question is what should be taken for the Japanese companies to get adopted the purpose-oriented management style. I have to separate the two parts. I mean, the diversity of the Japanese large companies with long histories and startup companies is totally different. The listed company, the Japanese large companies, has the average the board of directors, the age is 60. And my company, board's average age is only 45, so or 15 years younger than the listed company in 2,700 listed company in Japan. And one more thing, the average, the percentage of female executives is listed company is still limited only 8%. My company, the 2 out of 7 board of directors are female, so the Kedanen, the Japan Business Federation, set the goal for increasing the number of female directors 30% by 2030, and we has achieved the 30% ratio. So the diversification has been already progressed in the startup by operating the younger generation, millennials and Generation Z. So the answer is the key answer is the rejuvenation of the directors of board in Japanese large companies, I think.
Fantastic, thank you. I think there's a risk, isn't there, that purpose just encompasses too many priorities. I mean, perhaps the answer is to focus in on, for instance, being able to compete globally. So for each industry, don't just take on the domestic rivals, but think on a global scale. George, would you agree with that? Do you think it's best to hone in and have that kind of very focused, especially for large industrials?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I've now done 15 years as a board member of a listed company. I've done 7, and I mean, to Mitsuru's point, the average, I was surprised that the average age of board directors is as young as 60. I still think of myself as being one of the younger ones, and I'm 67. So, when we discuss purpose, and I have to say that in the last 15 years, 15 years ago, you wouldn't even have thought about discussing who the stakeholders are, let alone purpose. And we now have, very sensible discussions. And for example, at Daiichi Life, Mr. Inagaki, the CEO, is here with us today, so I have to be polite. But we had a very good discussion about the purpose of the company, and it's and although I don't disagree with Nick, who says that it's all about management, stupid. The fact is that you have to have a website, you have to have an annual report, and you have to have something sensible in there which describes what you do and why you do it. And in the case of Daiichi Life, it's a very pithy statement: by your side for life. And we had a very good discussion about that, including the English version. And that's something which I think is a sort of a segue into what I wanted to say, is that if you want to survive, you can't think of yourselves as a club which services its members, the male Japanese employees. I was just in the entrepreneurship session, which was really, really interesting. And the problem there is that there is not enough. The education system does not promote the idea of taking risk, and also the employees are not, they don't speak English, they can't communicate. So in order to change this problem of communication, you've got to change the idea of the community. Sampo Yoshi, actually, the clients are Japanese, the seller's Japanese, and society is Japanese. We have to even change the idea of Sampo Yoshi, because the employees are not. In many, many cases, Japanese companies, in almost all cases, most of our profits come from overseas, and most of our employees are overseas, but their voice is absolutely not heard in the formulation, for example, of the mission statement. So it can't be just a load of old Japanese guys sitting around in a boardroom abstractly thinking about the company's purpose.
I'd like to put each of you slightly on the spot, if I may, and really narrow this down and ask you one word in terms of what purpose should be. Should it be competing internationally Should it be shareholder returns? So just one word for what purpose should be, and then who is the top new stakeholder that needs paying attention to. So I'm looking for 2 words from each of you. What's the most important purpose, and then who's the most important new kind of stakeholder for the future, starting with you, Nick.
So I get the hard part.
Yeah, you're well able.
Thanks very much. Sustainable profitability.
Okay.
And the most important new stakeholder, who's not new, but it's just emerging as even more important than before, is young people.
Thank you.
To get staff.
Fantastic. Mitsuru?
It's the same. Young is the key, essentially, keyword for changing the and fitting for the global megatrend driven, purpose driven company. The young.
Akiko?
Yes, my word is Japanese, sorry. I will say waku waku should be the key word, which means you're very much excited to challenge something new that you have never experienced. And you're about to have fun. That's my waku waku. My stakeholder is a global community.
Fantastic. Thank you. George?
I think competing. Which markets are we competing in? Who are our competitors? What resources do we have to compete on those markets? What do we lack, and what do we need to get to compete in those markets? I think before we get to global society and other things, I mean, I really do think the shareholders need to be much more represented in this whole equation. We do not think way enough about profits, because without those, we can think about society and everything, but we need to make money, and we need to allocate resources to do that.
To draw special attention to that comment, because in the global context, obviously corporate purpose is all about moving away from Milton Friedman, the well-known economist. So George has just told us that in Japan we need a bit more Milton Friedman when it comes to corporate purpose. I think that's a really fascinating point. Mitsuru, I'd love to ask you, before we come fairly soon onto to Q&A, do you feel that when you're competing for talent, engineering talent, software talent, do you think that in hiring young people, do you have the same pressure to be able to tell them about what your purpose is? Because certainly in the US and in Europe increasingly, if you can't tell that kind of story, you're not going to get the best people. Is that a force for the Japanese firms like yours as well?
Sure. We have to become the purpose-driven company by 2025. Otherwise, we will not chosen by the talented millennials and Z generation. I mean, in the currently, Japan's working age population is 73 million, and the Z generation talented young people and millennials are the minority. But in 2025, millennials and Z generation make up the majority of this working age population in Japan. So I strongly believe that starting from the 2025, Japan has dramatically changed into the next generation company. So by this anticipation, we've appointed the CFO, not Chief Finance Officer, but Chief Future Officer. We've appointed CFO, the youngsters aged under 18, who proposes actions as a board member of my company. And the second CFO, Kawasaki-san, proposed that my company, irregular articles of incorporation, should change dramatically and perfectly fitting for the 17 SDGs goals. And amending the articles of in corporations in Japan is a special resolution under Japan's Companies Act, which requires a 2/3 majority of shareholders to approve the resolution. Then making money and sharing the dividends into the shareholders is what the stock company is all about. Many investors and many workers and media claim that, but when we put it to a vote, we are able to get more than 90% of shareholders to approve the special resolution. So, Japanese investors and companies, workers, they are changing better, and I feel that they are really supporting for our sustainable corporate actions. I'd like to share, because I'm really optimistic for changing and achieving the SDGs by 2030, because the Japanese working population will transform dramatically in 2025.
Thank you so much. And really, really fascinating to hear about Euglena. Mitsuru, do you find that there's any kind of difficulty with creating enough shareholder return, or does it sit very easily alongside, these very forward-thinking articles of association?
Yeah, it's a very tough way. So I have to share everything to the all stock stakeholders. The transparency is the top prioritized things. What I do.
Go ahead, Nikki.
Yeah, just wanted to comment that I'm hearing something similar as a trend from a larger corporation, saying that they would like to invest in a part of the sustainability, so reducing plastics, for example. And when I ask them why, is it because of the regulation or is it because of pressure from the consumers? They say, no, actually, it's not, because we want to do it because it really deeply resonates to our purpose. So the name of the company, the way they were founded, coming back to the original idea and then evolving it, they started to think that they have to invest in it. And to do that, they're going to squeeze out every penny out from the supply chain and, make money for that. So I wouldn't be too pessimistic. The larger corporations are also working on it.
Great. Final question from me before we get on to questions from you all. What is the risk of corporate purpose in the context of Japan? So when I was here in Tokyo, I was covering Abenomics to a large degree. There was a lot of focus on, lifting shareholder responsiveness, lifting returns, lifting that sort of side of things. Now we have new capitalism, and we've got this kind of global mega trend of corporate purpose in the rest of the world. Is there a risk that some of the improvements in corporate governance, for instance, in kind of responsiveness to shareholders, is there a risk that there's backsliding on that because of this push towards purpose? George, I'd love to start with you on that.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, Tamsin. And I've noticed that since the Roundtable discussion in 2019, that some of the perhaps older Japanese business leaders have said or started thinking, the world is finally coming around to Japan's way of thinking. And the problem for Japan is that we haven't got to Milton Friedman, so that we can move beyond Milton Friedman. And I'm not saying we should go to Milton Friedman, but we need to be cognizant of the fact that we cannot leave making money and allocating resources to make money behind as a concept. On things of sustainability and so on, my experience with Japanese companies has been very good. I mean, I don't think they are thinking any less about sustainability than any other company in the world, probably more. And coming from the UK, where most of the market capitalization is energy stocks and construction companies and finance companies, I think Japan has a lot to teach the UK.
Nick, can we go with you next on that? What are the risks of purpose here?
The risks are that the rhetoric and the PR slogan that is put together without enough spirit in the Buddha institutionally in that organization is a real part of the strategy, but really just a line on the website. It becomes a distractive smokescreen from the need to clean up your balance sheet, use excess cash, and really, truly, robustly invest in that purpose that you claim to have. If you think about what a good purpose in Japan is, we can all think of lots of good purposes, but a not so good purpose, a bad purpose in a sense, is that our real, regardless of what we have on the website, our real de facto, judged by our actions, purpose is to hold as much cash as possible so that we pay out a increasingly unproductive labor force that is overpaid, given their seniority scale, for a long time. And if that's what your real deep down, if you could admit it publicly, but you will never, purpose is, that's not a good purpose, and that's not the reason why corporate laws allow companies to be set up with limited liability, which gives them an incredible amount of capability to raise funds, and then when things go wrong, externalize risk on society and cause climate problems and opioid crises and credit derivative crises and blow up the world economy.
Mitsuru, can I ask you, just related to that point, do you think that the concept of new capitalism is going to help your firm in terms of its purpose-driven mission? Is it relevant? And what for you would be the risks of this push towards purpose?
Sure. Yeah, I'd like to answer your question, or what the risk is. Yeah, there are no risks and there are no restrictions. I mean, there are no legal restrictions are there. Yeah, because we, a listed company, irregular corporation, has dramatically changed, transform ourselves to the purpose-driven company, and appoint the chief future officer, junior high school student as a chief future officer, as a board member, and change and perfectly fit for my company's articles of incorporation, 17 goals to the SDGs. So we are able to do it, and there are no legal restrictions for the Japanese large companies prevent other listed companies from doing so. So while investors, startups, and consumers, millennials, and young Z generation are changing, the rest issue should be the pace of the change is still slow for large companies, and I want to I really want to make it commonplace for large companies to incorporate startups in their efforts to transform themselves, and I really want to encourage managers of large companies to have confidence that they can be on the same track of Japanese startup.
If I can add a tiny bit of detail there, Mitsuru went to 500 large Japanese firms trying to sell Euglena's product, and it was the 501st that finally took the product, which I think shows incredible
That's right, yeah.
tenacity. Akiko, just lastly from you, and then we'll get on to the Q&A. What are the risks of too much focus on purpose, or do you see no risk there at all? And will new capitalism help?
I don't feel a risk associated to the purpose. The only thing is that don't make boring purposes that's just like somebody else. As long as you have the right purpose that suits you, that is, that's a great thing. And just one thing, the purpose is something that's going to push you to challenge things, and it has to be a why, which means that the leadership has responsibility to identify and describe your purpose. It's not something that you just let your middle managers to come up with a nice word. So it is really the leader's obligation to come up with a purpose. So as long as you just, have that, I don't see any risk, and I see more like opportunities associated to the purpose. And let's just have a purpose and, keep pushing ourselves.
Brilliant. Thank you. So I'd love to have some questions from the audience. I'll sort of I'm hoping you've got plenty of them. I'll take sort of 2 or 3 in each batch. Who would like to go first?
Okay, the jumping, yeah.
Thank you very much, panel, for a very exciting discussion. My question is to Nick. Your career as advocating corporate governance and purpose, put the right purpose into corporate. I think you talked about the difficulty of Japanese corporate, how to permeate this sense of right purpose. I think the same with corporate governance into the organization. Japanese companies are very monotonous. I think you have run into several, bedrocks in certain companies in promoting corporate governance and this time purpose. What kind of advice can you give to Japanese large corporates or incumbents to use the right purpose in their corporation?
Thank you. Robbie, do you want to...
Thanks very much, Robert Gentleman from Morgan Stanley MUFG. My question has to do with this. Are we being a little bit lazy when we define age as the number of years since you were born? So if I could ask people on the panel, do you have a better definition of age we could use? For the worst example is an Enkojoretsu, age-based seniority, wages. This is a terrible idea. Do you have a better definition of age you could use in decisions? My sense on this is the willingness to actively pursue new ideas. Some of the oldest people I know are in their 40s, and some of the youngest are in their 80s. Does anyone have a better definition?
That's an excellent question. And then there was one more at the...
Hi, Hiroshi Saito from Microsoft. This morning, Minister Kono emphasized education, particularly re-skilling for growth. And I was wondering from each panel, from your own perspectives, your opinions, and 2, any actions that you would like to take on these issues. Thanks.
Is this reskilling girls in digital technology in particular?
Well, from my company's point of view, yes, but it's not limited to that area.
Great. Well, I think we should take those in order. Net, do you want to do the CEO Daiichi Life question first? Which was, what advice on corporate governance would you have? Practical advice. A great deal, I imagine, but try and keep it succinct.
So I feel like I should first agree with Robbie and his definition of youth or age in this context entirely. Open mind, ability to reskill, willingness to reskill, etc. Change ways of thinking. The response to your question, the post-war economy, as you know very well, has become extremely different from the pre-war economy, which was actually much closer to the sort of more robust Series A or raw capitalism of the West at the time. And that break-even point, Bunkiken, sort of really happened during the 1970s when emerging customs of lifetime employment were increasingly solidified in case law, and then put into labor law in labor law itself. And this has made it extremely difficult to change Nenkojuretsu, the seniority ladder in Japanese companies, even if you want to. And it has induced a sense, not a custom for decades. And that's the way people are raised in companies, so that's how they act and habitually think, no matter what, they have no other replacement way to think, that you don't have a job description and you can be put in any job we like, and you're not paid on performance, or are you encouraged to have a career path that you co-participate in defining, that sort of thing. And all these things are not helpful in a globalizing economy where we need to use human resources much more flexibly and their open minds to new ideas, to do new things and manage people in a different way. So the new capitalism has a lot of good ideas in it, but it really, I think, won't get to the core of the problem unless it puts a knife, shall we say, cuts the surgeon's knife into the labor law itself and substitutes a new type of labor contract for what we have now that enables companies to terminate staff if they pay severance, but hire them on a long-term basis all the same. So you can stay with the company as long as you like, as long as you're performing well. If not, we may terminate you. If we terminate you, pay fair severance. This is basically the German system, which is very similar to Japan, but just interprets it a different way. Thank you.
Fantastic. Mitsuru, I think that your chief future officers are all young women. So I'm going to bring the education point to you. How important do you think that is?
Yeah, I'd like to emphasize the importance of the education for raising the optimistic mindset and the entrepreneurship mind as well. In Japan, currently the high school student, the number is 3 million. And there are students who take the entrepreneurship study or to meet in person with the entrepreneur, still only limited, only 1%. And Japanese government set the goal for raising the entrepreneurship in my country tenfold in next 5 years. So we have to raise the studies of entrepreneurship in high school and in the university, in the college, from 1% to 10%, tenfold in next 5 years. And we also pick the entrepreneurial student for the director, board of directors, not only in the startup, but also, I strongly recommend that your company, Japanese large companies, should appoint the entrepreneurial high school or university students as a chief future officer for transforming yourselves, fitting for the new generation. By 2025, you should do it now, today, because by in 2025, the majority will change into the millennials and Z generation. So otherwise, you couldn't adopt the talented student. So you need to hire and appoint the entrepreneur student. And for the government, we have to raise the entrepreneurship mind study 10 times in the next 5 years.
Thank you. And Akiko, just to Robert Feldman's point about age, would you be able to respond to that? I'm sure you agree. Well, I hope so.
Yeah. Let me respond to that and also to the reskilling one, if I may. I agree with you. I don't think it is about an age, but we do want to try and capture people who are with a younger age because, they typically have less opportunities. But I would define age as just like Nicholas has said, it has to be associated with the willingness to learn new things and the ability to do that. So we shouldn't put too much of a cap on the age. And so that would be my view. About the reskilling, I'm greatly glad that the government started to say reskilling, because it is very much important for Japan, especially when we do have to have a more stable labor situation. So rather than just having one employee in and out, depending on the skill sets, we tend to have a stable employee base, and then want to rely on that. You want to reskill your people.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think reskilling in terms of training is less important than having your employees or people or leaders experience things. So you have to meet with younger people, younger in mind people, with the new startups, and do new things, experience that, learn from parts, and then you will start changing.
That's great. Akiko, I'm afraid I'm going to cut you off there because we've got some online questions coming in, which will be great to be able to get to.
So we have one online question, and this is to Mitsuro-san. So because corporate purposes are to be shared and practiced by employees, could you share how you communicate and implement the good corporate purposes you have with your employees?
In my company, for the employees,
Yes, I
Yeah.
believe so.
There are so many studies for sharing the what I experienced in Bangladesh, and some people we dispatch the very important next generation executives to the Bangladesh, and enjoy the 1 month actions in Bangladesh. The same to I have experienced in Bangladesh in the university students, and other videos and articles are providing to the newbies and other executives as well.
Great. I think we've got time for one last question. And could it please be a provocative one? The person at the back there, thank you. Would you do tell us who you are, of course, at first?
Hi. Thank you so much for a great panel, and I really appreciate. My name is John Kojo Moriwaka, aka Crazy John. So my last question to you is, what is better actually? How could I say? How could you motivate your employees or anybody to have a reskill training? What is the better? How do you say? What is more important than having a skills? How would you be able to train, like, to improve people's mindset?
Can we have just a tiny bit more clarification on that question? So you're saying what's more important than reskilling? Could you just put the question again, just briefly, so that we can understand it better?
日本語でいいですか？簡単に言うと、スキルより大事なものって何ですかっていうか、マインドであったりとか、モチベーションですね。特に日本の方は、many Japanese have not lived in overseas. They are born here and grew up here. So, but I'm sure people here have lived in different countries. So we have a global mindset. We know the current situation. Japan is actually facing, having many issues. ということで、日本の方にどうやってモチベーションアップしていただいて、海外のだったり日本のスキルが必要だって言ってもですね、難しいと思うので、どうやってモチベーションアップして、みんなで一緒に日本を変えようとか世界を良くしようと思っていただけるかっていうマインドセットの部分です。ちょっとね、まとまってなくてごめんなさい。
I think that's an excellent question. Nick, do you want to take that one?
Sure. If I understand the question properly, I think you're asking, what is the best way to motivate people to realize that they need to be doing the work to reskill themselves and to feel energized by that, and not as if it's just a order from above that is depressing somehow. And it's a very good question, because motivating employees is exactly what good management is all about. And the key is really to understanding throughout the organization that we cannot survive and thrive. And life will not be very much fun around here in 5 or 10 years if we do not thrive unless we are flexible in all of us, constantly upgrading our skills and meeting certain performance qualifications constantly. And so the willingness to have your performance measured and installing systems to measure performance and to measure skills and do talent mapping and do career planning with employees and have a job description that is clear for an employee that we can therefore judge his performance or her performance based on. And realizing that if we all live with this process, which is much more, shall I say, defined as a management process in foreign companies than it is in Japan, their willingness to live with that because it's good for all of us and it's good for you. And part of that is instilling in them, without being overt or too, shall I say, heavy-handed about it, the concept that your career, sir, or madam, is up to you to improve your skill sets over time and your value to the company or any company you might work for over time. Once they realize that it's good for the company and for themselves both, they get the same motivation.
Fantastic. I think we'll close the panel there. Thank you so much to the audience for your attention. I hope you found it interesting, and a huge thanks to our panelists for speaking really frankly and in a really interesting way. Thank you.